Genius Invocation TCG is undeniably a great addition to Genshin Impact, but it exists in a very unique space within the game, and that all stems from the fact that it's permanent content, something which Genshin sees added very rarely. Most editions are either limited time events or gameplay that is really only intended to be completed once. The only things which have some incentive to come back to are the Spiral Abyss, which regularly resets and changes enemies, and the Serenity Pot, which has gradually received more features, furniture, and quality of life updates since its release long over a year ago. It's easy to see why this is the case, considering not everyone that plays Genshin will be interested in whatever permanent content is added. Meanwhile, the limited events that come and go benefit from the fear of missing out that affects all levels of players. But now that we've gotten a game which is by nature something that can be played repeatedly with layers of variation to keep it from getting stale, everything about Genius Invocation TCG's implementation is great. Well, except for one thing that seems to be causing a little bit of confusion. For a one-on-one versus game designed this well, the lack of a ranked matchmaking system becomes pretty pronounced for those seeking a challenge. To be honest, I was pretty surprised when matchmaking was announced to be included at all, since it wasn't mentioned in the initial reveal. But given how much effort went into making the game mode, it makes sense that they wanted to give players an on-demand PvP experience. Now, my initial impression on the absence of ranked play was that Hoyoverse wanted to keep the game casual. It is true that unlike the core combat-based gameplay of Genshin that is dependent on characters you acquire and can power up through spending real-life money, you can get every Genius Invocation card simply through playing the game. A lot of cards you get by winning against NPCs, and in the shop you can specifically choose what types of decks you want to build towards first, meaning the game meets the bare minimum of not being pay to win. But introducing more incentive to win, like a rank system or even just basic rewards for winning in PvP, inherently lends itself to meta chasing, the opposite of a casual experience. Without any concrete incentives to win, and likewise nothing in terms of penalties for losing, the game lends itself more to using the characters you actually enjoy playing the most and overall more individual experimentation. If you use the same meta deck and win every game in the unranked queue, you're gonna get bored of it pretty fast. Even if they made rewards that were purely cosmetic, Genshin has pretty much always steered clear of having any kinds of systems that directly compare you to other players. There's a reason why there's no leaderboards for clear times on the Spiral Abyss. Moving out of the realm of design and into more concrete development challenges, skill-based matchmaking at the very least increases the queue times to find an opponent. Right now, that probably wouldn't be an issue due to how many people are trying out the TCG for the first time, but as that initial hype wears off, funneling all players into the unranked queue will make matching simpler and faster. And in the absolute worst case scenarios of skill-based matchmaking, some players may not be able to find suitable opponents at all. Then there's also the metrics which determine a player's skill. If the system doesn't do a good job of evaluating players and matching them up with opponents of equal skill, then it kind of loses its purpose. Let me make it clear that skill-based matchmaking generally does make for a better gameplay experience since you theoretically will have closer matches, but just putting it in the game isn't nearly as simple as you may think. I should also mention that some players suspect the random matchmaking that's in the game right now does take into account a player's skill in some capacity, but I'm a bit hesitant. Personally, I feel that this would be a feature that they'd go and announce, but either way, the main argument for this being true is your first games being very easy. However, it's very clear that these are simply bots, like actual AI opponents meant to give you some free wins out the gate. The most telltale sign is that they don't stop to think even when re-rolling their dice. I'm not a fan of this practice, even if it does kinda make sense, but either way it does not prove or disprove the existence of skill-based matchmaking in the matching system. Aside from the fact that it is tied to a completely different game that requires you to first get Adventure Rank 32, Genius Invocation feels like it was designed with competition in mind. It's definitely unique from other card games with the way your deck centers around your 3 characters that are always in play, and how the total energy doesn't ramp up per turn, meaning you can make big plays right as the game starts. Undeniably, the player that rolls the elements they need and draws all the right cards is going to have a big advantage, but with the choice of how many dice to reroll and being able to sacrifice cards to convert dice to your active character's element, you have a bit more options even in the scenarios where you do get unlucky. Random elements are pretty crucial for card games as they force each game to play out differently even if the decks and players are exactly the same. Being able to make the optimal play from any situation that the game leads you to is a core skill for games like Genius Invocation, but adding more player input into those systems gives the game a higher skill ceiling. And from what I can tell, even though we are still in the early stages of figuring out the game, it seems fairly well balanced. Overall, the game is structured in a way where it heavily favors those who understand how to counter different tactics, can manage their resources, and understand when to take sacrifices for net positive trades, making it very suited for competitive one-on-ones. Furthermore, the potential skill expression of players is only going to grow as more cards are added and more strategies form. So initially, I had intended to have the rest of this video talk about Genius Invocation being a casual game with a competitive framework, comparing it to games like Pokemon and Super Smash Bros, which were not originally intended to have competitive scenes like most other competitively played games, but are skill-based enough to have them. The benefit to the developer of making a game in this style is that the responsibility of making decisions for the sake of competitive play moves away from the devs and to the community. For competitive singles in Pokemon and every Smash Bros game, the rule sets for competitive play were decided on by the community through trial and error. I initially figured that by not encouraging competition for Genius Invocation within the game itself, that Hoyoverse would be able to release new cards without having to worry about balance, since the community could simply ban whatever was overpowered. But the crucial detail that debunks this would-be theory is that games like Pokemon and Smash Bros necessitate community involvement primarily due to a lack of balancing updates. Now, if we look into the patch notes for version 3.3, it actually does note that they do plan on balancing cards in the future, which I wasn't expecting at all. The entire quote says, "After Genius Invocation TCG is officially launched, we will continue to adjust and optimize the balance of cards based on the duel situation and feedback of travelers, so as to continuously improve the gameplay experience of Genius Invocation TCG." This, of course, is another huge benefit of the TCG not having any monetization tied to it, since characters will be directly buffed and can more importantly be directly nerfed, unlike nerfing a character in the actual game that people have already spent lots of money to get. To me, this screams competitive play. Even if it's intended to keep the unranked matchmaking more fair or to ensure players can't insta-win against NPCs, the end result is that it becomes a better competitive game. Balance patches would presumably only happen every 6 weeks to be in line with the game's major updates, but it still blows my mind that they're even willing to put in that effort. When Genius Invocation was first announced, it was described as a mainly PvE mode that's light and casual, and we can definitely see where that mindset comes into play. However, Hoyoverse is making a bit of a compromise by including unranked matchmaking and by pushing out balance patches. The foundation within Genshin itself is enough for the community to run competitive events for those seeking it. So to answer the question whether Genius Invocation TCG is meant to be competitive or casual, the 100% accurate answer is both. Yeah, there's some sacrifices here and there, but to be able to cater primarily to the target audience of casuals while still keeping the hardcore audience in mind is pretty refreshing to see given the game's historical negligence towards that part of the community. But in reality, the primary takeaway from this video should actually be that Hoyoverse understands very well the foundation to making a competitive game, and maybe they just aren't willing to go all the way for only a side project. But if they were to dip their toes into making a legitimate esport with all that Genshin money, who's to say? Well, that's all from me today. I hope you found this video to be interesting or insightful, and as always, thanks for watching.